The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome, everyone, to another DevOps.com webinar. Today we have a very compelling and interesting topic talking about DevSecOps. That's a topic that's very near and dear to our hearts here at DevOps.com, and you'll hear more about that in the coming months from us. Today you're going to hear about a DevSecOps roadmap no matter what the scope. It'll take you all the way through. And we have a very interesting guest today, with that being Max, who is the Chief Architect at White Hat Security. With that, Max, take it. Max, are you there?
Thanks, Parker. I am here.
Okay.
Thanks, Parker. Thanks, Alan Schimmel, for putting this seminar together, and thanks for having us. I just wanted to introduce myself a little bit first. Max is my short name. Long name is Siamak Pazirande. I started at White Hat pretty much at the very beginning of the company, and at the time, the security landscape was quite different than it is today. We would often start by just educating people about what web app security really is and why people need it. Nowadays, it's out in the news. You know, you hear about it almost every day, and people are a lot more concerned about it, and people are asking about it. People want solutions, and this has been quite a journey for White Hat to kind of get to this point. Over the years, I've specialized in building dynamic application security testing scanners. Essentially, these are scanners that test an application from the outside point of view, essentially automated hacking. And we've worked on scaling this out to be able to handle thousands of applications. You know, at this moment today, White Hat is scanning over 15,000 applications, sort of round the clock, 24/7, and verifying those results and providing valuable information about customers and their exposure, and we're helping them to secure their websites, whether they're a smaller company or larger company. And over the years, we've kind of spread across the globe. Now we have a European presence. We've got 3 different centers where we have a number of top security researchers that are sort of delivering this service to our customers. The solutions we provide have evolved over the years, whereas we kind of started out as sort of a black box testing shop, meaning somebody would essentially provide us an application and we would try to break into it in an automated fashion as much as possible. Over the years, we've kind of started looking at the whole software development lifecycle. So it really starts early, and you really need to have sort of a holistic view on security if you want to put together an effective program. And you know, starting all the way at the design and planning phases, where you really want to get your developers informed on best security practices, down through the development process, where you want to be utilizing static analysis, which are essentially programs that read your programs, they analyze them, and they tell you weak points and practices that you're utilizing that may not be safe, all the way through QA testing and production testing, where this is sort of our bread and butter, where the black box testing and dynamic testing I was talking about sort of attack the system from an outside point of view and try to find vulnerabilities in it. And then these can be fed into firewall systems that would block such attacks sort of super late in the software development lifecycle. So typically what used to happen a lot is people would just sort of once in a while get an assessment, and you know, you'd get like someone to come in and do a penetration test across your product, and this would be almost at the far right, at the very end of this release cycle, and sort of an afterthought. And then, you know, even worse in some points, you know, you would just find out because there was some sort of a disclosure, or you would get hacked. So, you know, things are changing quite a bit now because you know, security is becoming more serious, and we're finding that we have to just kind of tackle the problem in a much more systematic way. So, by 2020, 60% of digital businesses will suffer major service failures due to IT security teams' inability to manage digital risk. So that's a pretty big deal. 60% is a huge number, meaning like there's a minority of companies that actually, they have their security programs together that will be able to kind of be safe. This is becoming sort of more an exception to the rule that you actually have security in mind. So this is why I think it's becoming more and more important, because it comes down to dollars. You want to attack early in order to save money, essentially. At the very latest point where you get hacked and you have potential disclosure, this is a very expensive thing to deal with. So I just wanted to give a little summary of what we're going to talk about today. So just wanted to talk about this concept of DevSecOps. It's pretty new and very similar to DevOps. So just wanted to kind of talk through that. And then we'll go a little bit into the basics of putting together a security program, which is just sort of like some background. There's a lot of different folks here from different sizes of companies. Whether you're small or big, we'll try to cover all the bases there. And then we're going to get a little bit into the nitty-gritty. We'll kind of start looking at some example implementations, API calls, some specific examples of DevOps or DevSecOps implementations. And then we'll kind of walk through some example scenarios for a couple different fictitious companies. So let's talk about DevSecOps. DevSecOps is really very similar to DevOps. There is sort of the same forces that were behind in DevSecOps. So basically, the reason DevOps is so popular nowadays is because the pace of development started really outpacing IT. It became more and more difficult for IT to deploy infrastructure and different copies of your environment, because they had to sort of manually deploy things. This was sort of before the DevOps revolution, and sort of as time went on, people started programmatically deploying infrastructure. That's sort of at the heart of DevOps. And some of the same properties exist in security now. So you really want to be automating as much as possible. So we were talking about how folks were used to get just a security audit at the end of a release quarter. Now we want to sort of ingrain that into your software development lifecycle, so you're kind of constantly doing that, and you're able to sort of show audit trails that you are doing that. So DevSecOps, the IT teams are kind of responsible for security, but software is is developing much more rapidly than they can keep up with. Often the IT team is not necessarily directly in contact with knowing what changes are going into the next software release. If you're a small company, you might be releasing multiple times in a week. Even larger companies now with agile development cycles, they might be releasing like weekly. This is a pretty rapid pace, and when you're developing weekly, you might be pulling new dependencies, new software into stack, new libraries that your developers are using, and your IT team just doesn't know. So, IT's desire to get closer to developers is really at the heart of DevSecOps. So, building automation into your build layers, into your DevOps stack, so that you're kind of checking for security on a regular basis. So let's just step back a little bit and talk about just the basics of secure development. I think it's important to do this before we get into talking about DevOps a little bit, because security really requires sort of stepping back and asking some really important questions. And then part of this is a good question to ask is, why is security such a challenge? Why is it so difficult? I think part of it is because it's not the main purpose of many businesses. So it's not their higher priority. But, it is, up there. It's getting up there more and more. And also, most developers coming out of college don't get secure coding practice training. Unless if you explicitly go and start taking the coursework for it. There's a lot of great resources out there, but it takes your architects and your team leads to kind of do the research and sort of support your team. It's all, if you want to have a secure application, it's really important to kind of support your developers in training, documentation. You want to look into your specific tech stack, and you really want to frame it well for them and set them up for success. It's important for you to sort of ask a couple questions before, when putting together a security program. You want to understand your business risk. You might be a small shop that's starting out where maybe the risk is minimal, or you might be, an HMO provider where your security is of utmost importance. If you're in the banking sector, it's a whole different ballgame. And it also depends on your size. If you're a small company, you have a much different outlook on if you're a very large multinational company. Your needs are very different. In one case, you might need reporting and compliances, and in the other case, it's more like nuts and bolts. How do we protect against cross-site scripting? So it's really important to sort of assess your security stance. And you may not everybody might have the budget to hire a security professional to run that program, but I think if you just sat down once or twice a year and really just assessed your company's exposure and just kind of put it down and have it there as something that you care about and that you put thought into, it actually, that basic exercise can go a long way. Of course, larger businesses have teams that are just in charge of doing this and kind of on an ongoing basis assessing their risk and figuring out where all their assets are and where they need to apply pressure. So the basics of secure development, again, I can't say enough about producing a supportive environment. We kind of talked about this already, so I'm not going to spend a lot more time, but in summary, all the tiers of your application really need to be built with security in mind. It's very much of a weakest link sort of model where you could be doing everything right at the UI, API, data layer, but then there's some business logic where essentially like you needed to have someone realize by looking at the application that like, hey, someone without admin access can just delete these buckets of data, maybe there was nothing that was found through any scanners, but there's some just logical application error that led to that. So it really requires a very holistic view of things, and this goes just beyond application security as well. I mean, the IT security, the perimeter security for your networks. You really need to be looking at the whole picture. Today we're kind of focused more on software development lifecycle, but really a security program kind of goes beyond that. So, but we have to limit ourselves to kind of covering the topics we're focusing on today. So let's think about the security practice checklist. This is specifically, if you're an application shop, this top 10 list is actually from a great resource online, the Open Web Application Security Consortium, OWASP. OWASP is a great website that documents a lot of the top application security issues that developers face in different kind of environments, whether it's mobile or if you're providing a service or a standalone application. You can go on that website and there's great documentation. So this came straight from that. Verifying security early and often is basically everything we're talking about today. Parameterizing queries. This is at the heart of the SQL injection attack, which is the ability of someone from the outside to break into your data layer and potentially like either damage or steal data from your databases, which can be protected against if you just parameterize your queries. I can go through more of these. Encoding data is all cross-site scripting. You probably heard about that. This used to be seen as a vulnerability that only affected your browser, but it can be leveraged in order to access other customers' data, and it's actually a very dangerous type of vulnerability to have, and you can protect it by encoding your data. Encoding data is all about separation of code and data. If you do not do that, there's a possibility of data sort of what hackers kind of do. They look for places where those boundaries are sort of blurred, and they take advantage of it. Anyway, we can go through more of these, but we got to move on pretty quickly. So I'm just going to leave it up to you guys to kind of check out these resources afterwards on specifics. So now we talked about sort of the background of what you want to do, no matter what the world looks like, as far as just security goes. But now let's promises. So DevSecOps is all about reframing the security question as a DevOps initiative. So meaning it can be pretty overwhelming actually to put together a security program because it's hard to know where to start. But a great place to do it is to just build it into your development lifecycle, which is kind of what DevOps did for IT infrastructure. It's just now, you know, if you want to deploy something onto the cloud, it used to be, you know, you had to kind of go and click things because now you just write configurations and programs that do the same thing for security. So why not treat a vulnerability in your application just like we do a feature? So we could have, you know, your product managers could be into the tickets that the developers use, and then you could have policies that say that, you know, you cannot ever release software that abilities, and rule of thumb that you would use to kind of put together different controls throughout the life cycles of your application. So this circular view of the software development lifecycle is more realistic than the linear view that we had earlier, because this is what companies go through. You know, it's sort of a never-ending cycle of you're building software, you're coming up with requirements, designing solutions to them, development is gone and interpreting those design decisions, QA is testing them, and you're pushing out to production, and then you're going right back into that cycle again. So you really want to have coverage across that whole range. So, you know, early on you want to get your developers to be well trained. You know, you could use computer-based training or documentation or, you know, the techniques we talked about before as far as just supporting your developers. As your development cycle starts moving forward, people are actually coding while they're coding on their IDEs, on their desktop environment, or maybe they're doing it at the command line. You know, typically, like folks would just run static analysis on their desktop to kind of find what vulnerabilities are going. You know, the white box testing is finding. Again, white box is all about it's white because you can see the source code of the application, and you know, theoretically, you have a lot more ability to tell what's wrong with it. Code reviews, you know, those things all fall into the development phase where you want to catch things early. And then once you push them out to QA and production, then there's a different set of testing where we call dynamic testing. So static and dynamic together, along with computer-based training in the early phases, now we're starting to kind of get to a place where you're getting pretty good handle on the security problem and setting yourself up for success. So just a quick just a quick walk through what a typical development cycle kind of looks like. You got the developers, as they're going through that circular software development lifecycle, as we talked about, they get requirements, they code up a feature, they run tests. Usually the tests they run are triggered when they're creating a candidate piece of code to merge into your repositories. At that point in time, the developers often get code reviews from each other. And if it passes all the tests, it gets merged into the code repository. And then from that, you might build some artifacts. And there might be multiple different code repositories that are all merged together for an actual application. And then you might have multiple teams, and each team might have its own integration branch, and then you run a team integration set of tests. And in larger operations, you have multiple teams, and then their integration branches get integrated together. So we have a whole range of possible sizes of companies. So we're going to go through like a really simple case in a little bit, but in this sort of world, we can think about a couple different places where we can add some additional security controls into our existing DevOps chains. Now, this diagram that I showed is, depending on the maturity level of your company and the maturity level of your DevOps chains, could be automated fully, or it could be automated and then there would be some human steps in the middle of it. So in an ideal world where it's sort of a continuous integration, as soon as the code gets merged by the developer, it sort of automatically flows through this entire chain of events, and that's sort of what DevOps provides. So now let's think about some of the points where we would apply pressure for security. So pre-commit static analysis, this is sort of while your developers are developing their code, and you want to be doing analysis of the code like on their desktop environments. Let's say you create a pull request, which is sort of GitHub Enterprise lingo, but essentially a candidate piece of code to be merged. You want to be doing code reviews there, static analysis, further like unit tests that have been curated specifically for security. And as you go through, you want to definitely do some black box testing, which again you could kick off like dynamic scanning on the actual application now. So the programs are now compiled, and you have like an instance of your application running in a QA environment, and you want to hit it with some dynamic testing. And if you have a larger team, you want to hit it again when you integrate the work from all the other teams with it, again in a black box dynamic testing fashion. And then finally, you push things out to production. There are products out there that you can use that actually scan your production environment, but they do it safely, which is really important to do. This is sort of like the bread and butter of White Hat. That's sort of where we started, production safe dynamics testing. You can definitely do a lot of damage if you're not careful. And then you may actually find vulnerabilities in production that did not exist in the earlier stages of your testing, and this is because there's a lot of environmental factors that play into this. So you want to really be getting coverage at all these different points, and let's say you do find a vulnerability late in the game, in step 5 here. There are technologies out there, web app firewalls, that you can push rules to based on the findings of a vulnerability scanner. And they would actually sort of temporarily block certain attacks while you kind of go back and fix it. So these are kind of the trigger points we already talked about, so I won't go over them again. I think we didn't really talk about Rasp, but this Rasp is runtime application self-protection, which is sort of another very late game. It's that number 6 mode of kind of protecting yourself, which are sort of like they're protections that are actually built into the actual execution environment that look for patterns that are just unsafe. Like if you're querying against your database, and you're concatenating strings together in order to form a query. Sorry, I got like pretty specific there, but that's what Rasp is all about. So smaller organizations. So let's just go through a little test app. Let's have some fun. So let's think about a little test app, like maybe let's say you're putting together a game based on, let's call it Bitcoin flip. It's a very simple game. You know, if a flip flips a coin, and then if you win, you get some Bitcoins. It sounds kind of boring, but then we're going to make it networked. So it's going to be a networked Bitcoin flipper app. So lots of fun. But let's say it just has a simple client-side UI, maybe all JavaScript side UI. You have maybe you put together a REST API, and then you have a data interface layer that talks to your database. So let's we're talking about a small shop. So let's say you just have one code repository, you kind of like you went ahead and you automated your build cycle because you're relatively modern, we can come up with a couple different places where we could apply sort of some of the concepts we talked about today. So we're going to do some static analysis early on, and we're going to look at some tools that you might want to use to expose your developers to static analysis, and sort of like build into your company culture that, like, hey, we're going to run static analysis on our code when we check things in. Furthermore, once you do check it into the code repositories, we're actually going to kick off tests that analyze your source code based on the code you've checked into the repositories. And then finally, when you finally push it out into your QA test build environment, we're going to run some dynamic analysis. It's going to crawl your website, look for weaknesses from a black box point of view. So let's say we wanted to do that. Let's just go through it and see what it would look like. So I'm going to reference some of the solutions that we use at White Hat to White Hat Security in order to provide some of these solutions. But I just want to say that there are a lot of other solutions out there that can be kind of put together. These are just sort of the sets of solutions that we have. But static analysis that integrates right into your IDE is really nice because it gets you sort of it gets it closer to the developers. You want to get your security tools as close as possible to your developers so that they can as they're coding, they can run scans and it'll find vulnerabilities for them, and then it actually shows them like the line of code where the vulnerability might exist. It has a little sort of a data trace through the application that it used to find, in this case, cross-site scripting, I believe. And it provides documentation right there, so it's easy for people to kind of learn about it as they're doing it. This is really important. And if you have questions about it, this reaches right out to our Threat Research Center team, and you can ask questions and find out more about whether what you need to do in order to understand and fix this problem. Applying directed remediation. So in some cases, the tool actually will even suggest a fix. So that was an example of some of the things you could do sort of early on, before your developers even check in your code, their code. Now, once they sort of begin to commit code to your repositories, we want to kick off sort of a second tier of tests and start sort of running some of the same static analysis code that we saw on the developer's desk, but really, again, to verify a second time to make sure that when you integrate it with other code bases, it'll still yield safe code. And then finally, once you get it into your QA stage environment, you want to kick off some dynamic tests against it to make sure that that someone can sit there and twiddle something on their browser and attack it from the outside and tickle some vulnerability. So let's go through. We're going to dive down a little bit deep now. So how would you actually implement this for the developers out there? In the case here, the integration is done through an API that White Hat provides, where you can schedule a scan on a site. This assumes that your site had already been, this assumes that this is talking about a web application, a website, let's say. It's kicking off a scan on that website, and then you can kind of poll for its results until it's completed. So, these could be all put into scripts in your, let's say, if you're using Jenkins or some other DevOps set of tools. At the end of the day, you're going to be scripting against this API in order to kick off vulnerability scans and then to pick up their results. Now, one of the things we haven't talked about too much is, the results of vulnerability scans. There's a lot of different tools out there. You can use desktop tools to scan your application, whether it's dynamic or static. But one thing they all have in common is it comes back with a ton of results, and you're sitting there and you have to understand what they're talking about. You have to research them, and you have to decide whether they're false positives or not. And even if they're not false positives, then you have to really assess how much risk they would really pose. So that's one of the things that you can sort of outsource to companies, and this is one of the things that White Hat does pretty well, is that all the results that we show to you are already verified, and then we also give them a severity rating of, how important is it to fix this. And then you can take that information and decide on your own, how important is this asset, and then build that into your risk model, your mental risk model about what you need to sort of fix. So you can put together these APIs, and you can, through DevOps Glue, you can kind of tie this into your build chains. And this is what DevSecOps is all about, sort of taking the solutions out there and integrating it together so that it fits to your specific use case. To make things easier, we also have some plugins. This is a Jenkins plugin, for example, that kicks off a scan, whether static or dynamic, against your code bases or your application as part of a build. And then at the tail end of it, if any vulnerabilities are found, there are plugins to automatically generate tickets into your ticketing system. Many of them are supported. There's a sort of a common interface to a bunch of tickets through this service called TaskTop. So this starts making things more and more automatic. You want to attack all the manual steps in your DevOps chain in order to sort of optimize the flow of your software. And this example demonstrates how you could add security testing into your DevOps. So an example of DevSecOps. Now, this is a fairly new field still, so there are some pain points, and it's important to talk about them. But the scanner result verification is definitely a pain point, and that's one of the reasons you might want to go with more of a managed service where they would weed out false positives and help you. Larger companies might have entire teams that just do that, but smaller companies or companies with less budget, depending on your constraints, you might want to sort of outsource some of that stuff, and so that you can kind of focus on your core competency more. And this is one of the things White Hat is pretty good for. But again, like well, going back to the pain points, static dynamic scan speeds, definitely a challenge. This is sort of in the whole industry, this is a problem, is that you cannot get both a deep, complete scan and an extremely fast scan at the same time. You kind of have to choose. Therefore, sort of there's a sweet spot where you can run a scan for finding the most critical and high vulnerabilities, while remaining high confidence as well. So, again, if you're using a managed service, at least you can kind of weed out the false positives. But at the end of the day, you're going to come back with a set of vulnerabilities that were found against your application that you need to decide to act against now or later, and you need to kind of build that into your risk assessment equation that should be running through your head sort of all the time throughout your software development lifecycle. Your QA engineers are going to sort of see this and decide, what they need to do against it, whether they need to stop it or not. But, the speed of the scans is kind of a problem if it's not fast enough, because it can actually get into in the way of your development cycle. So a lot of people kind of use the integration phase, which is usually an overnight test, or or it might be maybe you're doing a weekly release. You can sort of do longer length scans at that point in time. So let's step out now. So we kind of went deep into a specific implementation. Now, what does it mean? Let's say you have a larger company, and let's say we have that diagram that we talked about, the software development cycle. Let's say you have multiples of that. You might have teams that are, they might not even be physically in the same location. You still need to do all the things that we talked about that a small company would. And in the Bitcoin toss example that we talked about, the same things that those guys would be worried about, you'd probably be worried about too. However, you might have, some other sensitivities. You might have, depending on the application, you might have very sensitive data. If you're in the banking sector or health sector, for example, or insurance, you might put a great deal of emphasis on one portion of your company. And then, there might be you might have other subsidiaries, portions of the company that, maybe the security is not quite as important. So, it's important to have different profiles for where you're going to apply pressure. So you might have different actual policies that are applied to different properties, to different pieces of your application. And we're going to go through an example of that shortly. But essentially, the demands of the company change now. So now you're talking about like the top level security folks in your company, and what do they need? How could DevSecOps help them? So there are actually very clear places where they could be helped by this as well, because as you get larger and larger, the need for reporting becomes more important to be able to sort of get an overall view of your business, of your overall risk. You're not as interested in finding the particular vulnerability details, but you actually want to produce reports about how your development teams are, how secure are they? How are they improving over time? How long does it take for your company to fix a given vulnerability, and how do you compare with other companies in your sector? So these statistics, are things that most people don't really have access to, and they change over time as well. So this is one of the areas where White Hat has a lot of experience. Over the last 14 years, we have all this data about all these different companies over many sectors that show trends, and we can kind of give you a view of your overall sort of a meta view of your overall risk profile. So some of the common challenges at this medium-sized company level, are that the services that you use to sort of assess the security of a particular code base, now that you're kind of living in a much larger world, you have many different pieces of an application that are kind of loosely coupled and they interact together. So there actually aren't a lot of static analysis tools that can sort of analyze the source codes from multiple different services. For those of you familiar with microservices, this is an architecture where different pieces of your application are using message queues or APIs to communicate together. And each of these individually you would run static analysis on, but then, if you want to really look at the security of the whole thing, you need to look at the bigger picture of the whole ball. So you really want to be running dynamic scanning on that. But so there's a gap between the static analysis and the dynamic world in that case, and the static analysis world is still sort of catching up there. Verification, over and over again, this is something that is a huge pain point for your dev teams. I mean, it's a real time sink to have to read through 500 results from the scan that you just ran. Increasing the need for analytics. This sort of just leads straight into our next scenario here, and it looks like we're pretty short on time, but I'm going to just kind of go through this real quick. Compliance becomes much more of a factor as you're a large company. So your DevSecOps chains can directly document the various steps of your software development lifecycle where you did security checks. You passed the tests. Maybe you produced some vulnerabilities, and then it produces tickets that you addressed. When you're getting audited, this is what counts. This is when you can show them that you actually have, breadcrumbs about all the pieces of your software development cycle that actually show that you are on an ongoing basis addressing security, fixing them when vulnerabilities are found. So it can be a great tool if you already have this built into your DevOps chains to be able to just quickly reference, that auditor is going to ask you, hey, show me the specific example that, of a vulnerability that was found or a scan that was run, and you can kind of dig into the specific sprint that you ran some tests in and show them, the logs that did this, the tickets that were generated. This is very powerful to get you sort of to demonstrate your security posture. We're pretty quickly running out of time, so I'm going to wrap it up here, but with a quick...
Next partner, take your time. No hurry. We'll be fine.
Okay, cool. So we're going to walk through an example of... we're going to say, let's say you have a large healthcare company. So, you have, let's say your application has a couple different pieces that have different needs as far as the security profile goes. Maybe you have an application that's just documentation for customers. It's fairly static. Maybe it has an administrative interface for changing it, but it doesn't really have any customer data in it. So that's sort of like a low-risk profile. Now you might have like a actual portal that might show like customer data. This is going to be probably needs to be like HIPAA compliant. You need to be very conscious about access control, who can access what. This is definitely going to go into your high risk pool. And then you might even be selling some medical appliances online. And then let's say that application also needs to have access to your medical records as a customer. So that's like a cross section between both like finance and HIPAA compliancy. So PCI compliancy is a set of compliances you need to have if you're ever going to store like credit cards or do transactions. So that would be definitely in the high risk pool. So I think you start to understand what I'm talking about here as this analysis needs to happen about your assets. And at the end of the day, you map those to a number of applications on the back end, and then you kind of start putting together a program that, for your highest risk assets at least, you really want to get those developers supported, get them training, and start talking about, hey, where can you guys demonstrate that you're doing on a regular basis, security assessments? Can you build it into every release that you're at least doing a dynamic scan? And if you want to get even more sophisticated, can you mandate that you pass static analysis? And then ideally you would put together a software development document that specifically has a policy of, hey, developers shall not put out any piece of code with high or critical level vulnerabilities, and really try to stick to that as much as possible. So this would be an example of of some of the things you could do. For example, I just kind of went through these are very specific points, but add ticketing checkbox for architectural security review. It's really important to sit down up front during design phase and think about security sometimes. Let's say you're putting together microservices architecture, there are very clear places to look about like best practices for those things, and these are like design time checkboxes, code review checkboxes for pull requests. Again, like just ensure that your developers are doing code reviews across each other's pull requests and candidate branches, and and as part of those reviews, code reviews, you can just specify you guys need to check through the top 10 OWASP top 10 security list. Does it pass that? Codified tests. This is all about treating security just like we do features. Static analysis. Anyways, the needs of each company are going to be slightly different, and you need to sort of decide what your budget is and how much you're willing to buy into this world. But essentially, it's not a one-size-fits-all, and we need to sort of decide what's important to us. But one thing that's really important is that just have that exercise of sitting down and sort of assessing your risk, and coming up with a formal or informal policy that you kind of make available to your development team, and then support them. This is really what can lead to a healthy, secure development environment. So I just added a couple of resources here. I have our website at whitehatsecurity.com. There's a lot of great topics of discussion on that website. Also, the owasp.org website is a great resource. There's all kinds of really detailed information for different kinds of vulnerability attacks and how to protect against them. And with that, I am going to pass it back to you, Parker.
Back to me, Max. Max, that was great. Thank you. Very informative. It's amazing if you've been in security a while, how it was always an afterthought. Now, in the development process, it's clear it's become front and center. Isn't that amazing if you look at it over the past so many years, that now security is a real issue, it's part of the development process. Max, when it comes to some of the products, I'm curious. You have different platforms. You have Windows, you have Linux, and everything could look different on platforms. Can you talk a little about how compatible, what platforms you work on, and how your product is easy, it's ease of use or its look as you go from different platform to platform?
Yeah, great question. And so, obviously compatibility is really important, and you probably wonder, hey, if I'm developing on Windows versus if I'm developing on a Mac, if I'm developing a desktop application versus a mobile application versus a website, what does it look like? So there are different paradigms for testing. We talked about static and dynamic, and let's just take static first. This is, we talked about customizing the documentation you provide for your developers to the tool sets and the tech stacks that are applicable to them. So, depending on what you're using, pretty much all the different languages out there have some sort of static analysis support for finding common vulnerabilities, like whether you're using Java or .NET, if you're using Python, if whatever you're out there. There are tools out there. White Hat supports a whole host of the most popular languages for static analysis. And the rules for those languages are always getting kind of researched and updated, sort of up to date. So from that point of view, you just kind of need to either use the right tools that support your particular tech stack, or you need to use a service that is supportive of those languages and those tech stacks. So that was all about the languages. Now, if we step back and look at it from a dynamic point of view, you're looking at a running application and you're trying to poke it to find vulnerabilities in it. So in this world, it almost doesn't really matter. It really matters to the security scanner that you're using, because it's trying to sort of, from a black box perspective, find out what's weak. But from your developer point of view, you want to get a tool that is good at fuzzing input and being able to exercise the app and get coverage of the app. So it's less of a concern to get something specific to your stack. But again, what both of these scenarios have in common is that you kind of get what you pay for. If you are using tools that are relatively cheaper out there, then you actually just have to take more of the responsibility of weeding out false positives and really understanding what the heck the results mean, as opposed to the other side of the range is more of a managed service, where you'll have a lot more support in terms of interpreting the vulnerabilities, removing false positives, and also just getting an understanding of the severity of them, being able to ask someone questions. So you kind of need to choose for your company, and based on your budget, where you land on that continuum there.
Yeah, speaking of plugins, does your Jenkins plugin work with pipeline jobs?
Yes, it would. I mean, you could just as long as you have the plugin installed, you should be able to create a job that uses the plugin to kick off a scan on White Hat. Yeah, no reason not to be able to use it on a pipeline.
Oh, that's great. Then here's some, I'm starting to go through some questions that have come in. Let me see, which is, a lot of people are asking if the deck will be available. We will send everyone a link after the webinar so you can do a replay of the webinar, as well as other resources are on there. You can see the slides, you can see a replay, you can see whatever you need. And also visit whitehatsec.com, and they have plenty of resources there. They also have people to chat live with. So if you have any questions, you can do that. You can go there. What is the scope of operations team for development areas? I don't quite understand that one, Matt.
Scope of operations team? Well, operations team typically used to be sort of more on the IT side.
Yeah.
And so I guess if I'm understanding that correctly, what is IT's role in and their relationship to the developers? So yeah, so this kind of goes back to why DevSecOps is sort of becoming more relevant, because that relationship typically is very at an arm's length. Like the IT folks, essentially, they typically want to use tools that have support, so that they're using, third-party tools and softwares and applications that give them certain guarantees of security, of service. But developers are constantly changing the application, and often the IT team, has no idea what's going into the next release. So what you really want to do is you kind of want to get you want to get rid of that gap as much as possible. So you do that by encoding security checks into your DevOps pipelines. You do that. DevOps essentially have the same problem with infrastructure, and it's largely solved by being able to deploy infrastructure using code and configuration that's checked into repositories. This is similar. You're going to have automation built into your software development lifecycle that is going to be exercising dynamic and static scans. Those scans are sort of similar to tests that developers would be writing themselves, but because they're much more complicated, the developers are not using it. They're using third-party tools that are kind of providing some of those solutions. But IT's relationship with that is that at the end of the day, they would be able to click down into some job log and see that they got all green, that it passed all checks, and that we didn't release software with any defects security-wise. And IT is at the end of the day not going to be understanding all the lines of code that are going in, but they do understand the concept of security policies, what their security policies should be, so they can sort of craft the security policies for the different applications and work together with the security professionals within the company to do that. And the developers are more in charge of sort of implementing the actual DevOps chains that make sure that those security controls and policies are actually enforced. And then, the development managers are the ones that really keep an eye on things to make sure that everything is honest as advertised.
Okay. Another question. How can we implement DevSecOps for the dynamic content pages?
For dynamic content, I'm assuming, I'll take an example. So dynamic content might mean that you have a site whose data affects the content that's shown. So you might have an administrative interface, for example, to modify data that's exposed to the clients. You might have other clients that expose data, that modify data. I mean, you could take an example application, like if you're running, let's say you're a provider for an online email company, that's dynamic content. It's changing all the time. And then, besides the data, you're also modifying the actual programs, both on the client side and back end that actually provide that service. So, in a way, this is no different than the applications we talked about during this talk. There is questions of access control in the example I just mentioned. You don't want one customer seeing another's customer's data. There's questions of content encoding. You want to really protect against browser side vulnerabilities like cross-site scripting, cross-origin request forgery, all kinds of things like that on the client side. And then you want to protect against, the database side, the data side. So yeah, definitely dynamic content is a very large category. So I'm not really sure if there's anything specific.
Well, Max, what this might be a good time to do is they can try the free trial. If you go to the White Hat Sec homepage, up to the right is you can get a free trial. Would this be a good, example of how to use a free trial to see what it works with and what it doesn't there?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Check out our website. We have free trials for dynamic scanning. We actually have a new product coming on the line where it makes static analysis really quick and easy to try out. A product called SourceX, which is going to give you sort of the ability to sort of quickly run a scan across and show you sort of like the high critical vulnerabilities of your given code base. But yeah, for sure, take a look at our website. There are free trial request forms.
And then you have live chat. If you're confused about what to use or not use, he'll help you get through it. And if you really want to get deep into these offerings, you can become a White Hat certified secure developer. So White Hat has plenty of programs to take you through to get you, intimate with their product and support you and make sure you're sure yourself with it. I have another question here from KK. The KK I know is from CloudBees. I was just with him 2 or 3 days ago. Should unit tests cover OWASP top 10 or mostly just functional security features, i.e. relay more on SAST, DAST for OWASP aspects?
So ideally, if you can encode security tests at any layer, and I would highly encourage them. Now the problem generally is that it's just not a very easy thing to do. If you wanted to write a unit test that checks for a particular type of cross-site scripting, in the real world, let's say you write a test that exercises like your template generation code and attempts to inject a single quote and sees if if your application actually encodes it when the input goes down into a deeper layer. That's a great thing to do, but then there's also ability to just twiddle that input just a little bit more maybe use a different kind of encoding to get by that attack. And then, you just have to be really good at knowing what to test for. And the common challenge there is not only do you have to be really good at doing that kind of testing, but also you have to constantly adjust. And it's not even just about your code, but also like all the libraries that you're using. You might be using a third-party library that has a vulnerability that is not even in your control, and then you upgrade to the latest, and then you kind of just inherit this vulnerability. So you want to be using a service that's where their job is to do that. If you're running static analysis, the static analysis will reach out to the CVE databases out there and look to see and compare against the libraries that you're using and give you a reporting of that, for example. But still, I think it's a great thing to strive for if you can incorporate, whether it's unit or integration level tests that ensure that a particular type of vulnerability won't happen. Then that's great. That's wonderful. You should do that. You probably want to amend that with some other security scanners out there that are kind of keeping up with all the different types of vulnerabilities that are out there. So unless if you're really willing to take on the brunt of becoming security experts, which some companies have the budget to do, but not everybody.
Yeah, this is sort of a perfect lead into the next question. What makes major difference between white hat security scanning versus application performance monitoring tool?
Application performance monitoring tool?
Yeah, the difference between white hat security scanning and application performance monitoring tool. What's the...
So performance monitoring sounds like they're very different beasts. Performance monitoring is all about knowing how responsive your services are, how well they can take load, for example.
Maybe they're looking at it from the aspect of what kind of load you put on the system, meaning white hat security.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
I'm just guessing here.
Yeah. Just to finish that thought, as opposed to performance, white hat security is about finding weaknesses in your security implementation. Now, you might wonder, if you're going to be scanning my production site, are you going to generate so much load that my customers won't be able to, that their user experience is going to be affected? So first of all, this is only one of the products that we offer, which does production scanning. All the other ones would be earlier in the life cycle, so they won't really affect your, they would affect like your QA systems and your developers early on, not really your production environments. In the case of the production environment, so we have a special service line, PE, the production edition, which is essentially very careful at how it does dynamic scanning. In addition to not generating a lot of load, you can specify the number of requests per second that you want the scanner to be able to send. In addition to that, there's a whole host of different kinds of attacks that you simply do not want to do on a real production system. Destructive attacks of various sorts. So yeah, the PE service line is relatively conservative in that manner, and only does certain types of attacks, and lets you specify the rate of requests that are sent out.
Yeah, well, really, it just begs the question of, the 30. That's why you offer a great thing, a 30-day free trial. They can look at it in their environment and say, yeah, this works, this doesn't. And if it doesn't, if you're having problems, that doesn't mean it's not necessarily working. It means you need to reach out to White Hat to see if they can, put it together properly for you. So I really encourage people to go to the website and dig in. They have live chat to help you if you're confused, and they'll get you to the right people. And with that, Max, I'd like to thank you for a great presentation. And, nice afternoon. I hope everyone enjoyed it. This is Parker from DevOps.com. And we'd like to thank you for joining us and look into the future. And we'll be talking a lot more about DevSecOps in our future over the next coming months. And please visit whitehatsec.com and see all the information. You'll get an email with the slides and with the replay of the webinar and all the information you need shortly after this webinar. Take care, everyone, and have a great day.